Okay. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone. My name is Sarah Brinks, a student at the University of Illinois. I'm thrilled to introduce this session, Showing Up and Standing Proud, Social Justice in Tech, and the two powerful women that you will hear from. They will discuss their journeys of advocacy, the Black Lives Matter movement, and how they promote activism in tech. One of our speakers is Harrison James, who is the Associate Director of the HEFT Technology and Management Program, which is focused on the intersection of business and engineering. She has also worked as the Director of IT Service Management at Teach for America. For our other speaker is Jewel Ifeguni. She is a PM at Microsoft in the Minecraft Group, founder and CEO of You Matter Studios. You Matter Studios is a media company focusing on highlighting marginalized people's stories. Throughout the session, please type your questions in the chat, and I will be moderating the chat to ensure your questions will be answered. Thank you, Ilalee and Jewel, for coming.
Thank you, Sarah, for that warm intro. She made us sound so fabulous.
Yes.
Before we get started with our intros, we would love to know who we have in the audience. So if you could drop for us in the chat where you're tuning in from and what generation you are representing. So you got a millennial in the house. Jewel, who you repping today?
Gen Z in the house.
You know. So we're having a very important conversation, intersectionality across all the different areas, our generations being one, since there are nuances and differences in our experiences. Yes. So if you all can get started dropping that in the chat, Jewel will start with her story. Okay, LA.
Yes. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Jewel Ifeguni. I use she, her pronouns. And I'm super excited to be here, especially with Ilalee, and to really just be able to share each other's stories and really have these important conversations. So, as you're dropping what you're repping in the chat, I also want you to think about the times that you've been underestimated or you've been ignored. And it's for reasons you can't control, like your identity. I grew up in the suburbs. I came here to America when I was 1.5 years, and I was raised to, dream big and really live the American dream. But as I grew up and as my family understood what it was to be Black in America, we recognized that America can be a catfish. And that is because the way our society is shaped, it treats us like second-class citizens. And so what does it look like to navigate like that and have that impact what you're trying to do? And so that is kind of what I think that's something we share on this call, is like, that's kind of what drew us into doing what we do, because we want to continue to open the doors and ensure that people who look like us can rise. And so for me, that came about starting in high school. Those were my early experiences, because again, I grew up in the suburbs. I was typically one of the onlys. And me and my friend were like, hey, as Black women, we're amazing, we're magical, but we aren't getting that kind of support in our education, in our support. So we started a girls group called BU, where we would celebrate our beauty and celebrate everything we wanted to do and have important conversations across all communities. So that was like a taste of what it's like to really open the doors and uplift. But then I also had a draw to tech. Just like many of us on this call, social media was rising at the time. It still is. And I wanted to be a part of the behind the scenes of creating that. And so I got interested in computer science during my high school year, and it was great learning how to code. And then I was able to go to Google's Computer Science Summer Institute. And it was just cool to get the experience of technology and also seeing that representation. But then a pivotal moment happened when I entered university. I told you all I'm super excited, learned about tech, and I was ready to take on learning computer science at, University of Illinois. So also an alum, shout out ILL. And yes, and it was our first freshman computer science class, and I decided to partner with a bunch of guys, and I thought it was going to be great because half of them had attended the same camp as me for computer science, and we were working on an app that I pitched. So what's interesting is that it was our first time working together, and somebody in our group decided to take the lead position and assign roles. So for people that don't know, when you're building an app, especially in the early stages, after you map things out, then it's pretty easy to have everyone have a technical role. Well, in this scenario, every single person, and I was listening, oh, you should code this part, you should code this part, you should design this part. My role was to draw the logo. And I mean, literally, they wanted me to use a pen and paper. Now, imagine how that feels to be underestimated because of who you are. Now, in that moment, I could have been pissed because why would you assume that? I could be sad because I'm like, wow, again, like, why would you assume I'm not capable, or all of the above? Now, to be transparent, I probably was all of the above. But in those quiet moments, I recognized, okay, how can we change this so then no other person has to go through this? And so I started to think, okay, cool. How do we shape perceptions about people? And the media is very powerful in how we see each other. And so the tech part of me is like, okay, cool. Let's hack for a solution. So people begin to see each other as equals and not just assume our capabilities because of who we are. And so I participated in my first hackathon called Pearl Hacks, and I definitely recommend, especially for the women on this call, is a hackathon for women. And it was a great experience collaborating and creating something that could empower women. And I was getting closer and closer. And then there was that moment during my second experience. So this was after my internship at Microsoft. And I also was recognizing that my sister, who's a big gamer, was struggling to see herself as a main character. And so you have two kind of driving forces. You have the moment where people in computer science assumed I couldn't code because I'm a Black woman. And then I'm also seeing the other side where my little sister who wants to play games can't even create a character or sees someone that looks like her as the main character. So when you don't have that representation, you got to make it yourself. And so I worked with friends during that second hackathon to create a game called #Queen, where my little sister was the main character. And after creating that and seeing the impact, it's like, cool, that's how we change things. That's how we change the conversation, by creating that representation, especially in forms that we use today, like games or media. And so that is what inspired me to create You Matter Studios during university, because I wanted anyone to see our content to recognize that they matter. Because when you don't see yourself on screen, when you don't see yourself represented, it's that assumption that you don't belong in the conversation. And so that is how we started You Matter Studios. We are a media company that is fore-fronting marginalized voices with a focus on uplifting Black voices. We've created several short films, and most recently a virtual reality film that reenacts a police pullover from 3 different perspectives. Now, that is one side, You Matter Studios. I'm also a PM at Minecraft, and to continue to really forefront marginalized voices and really be representation and uplift Black voices, I'm grateful that I'm also able to do that in tech, because something as powerful as just being in the room and being that representation is really how we continue to push it forward. But that is just the beginning of my story, and I'm excited to hear more from Ilalee.
When I was typing, Jewel just dropped so many gems. I love her story. I love more people hearing her story. The moments of impact for me really resonate, because central to my core values is this pursuit of impact. I am biracial. My father's an immigrant from Jamaica. He came here in his late teens, early 20s. Played soccer at UT Austin. Okay. And that was part of how I saw the world. I saw the world as an immigrant's daughter. I saw the world as someone who shows up and looks Black, but has the charisma of an athlete and all of these things from my father, but is ultimately being raised by a white woman, by my mother. And so I had access and privilege to white middle America, and a lot of my lens, how I see the world, how I navigate the world with a sense of authority and power and being able to prosper where I'm planted. That is all coming from my and my ability to effectively navigate middle white America, because my aunts, my uncles, my parents all built that lens, all defined that notion in me very young. And that's a very different way of experiencing the world and growing up in the world. Now I'm a millennial, so I have a little bit more time in this DEI conversation. I've seen tech grow, right? I was in college when Facebook, don't tell anybody. I was in college when Facebook started, right? And so I got to see kind of DEI and tech and the growth, and then Black Lives Matter and what that did. And so I was already aligned in my core values, which were really around bringing people into the conversation instead of stepping away from the conversation. Those tough discussions build relationships, and the only way you change people's hearts is through building relationships. So I was already in the mindset of having social impact, leveraging technology, and building relationships, which kind of set me up to really prosper when social media did hit. And so I, like Jewel, have a experience where I started very young, working on this kind of passion that drives us deep in our belly to kind of motivate us through all of these different experiences where we are first only other, and navigating them in a way that thinks about the little sister coming behind us and kind of sets up a path. Be the first at the table because we know we're bringing more behind us. Be the first in the room, even though that room is hella awkward, because we know we're bringing the culture with us. And so I just kind of navigated my sole proprietorship, my entrepreneurship, my intrapreneurship all the same way. I had a deep desire to have more people that look like me in positions of power, whether that means female, whether it means Black, whether it means first generation, at the table, making decisions on the technology that's going to shape our society. I made that link very, very early, and I got to see how many companies and businesses, whether that's a small business or a charitable organization, or even programs that the government is putting out, and the disconnect between the stated mission, which is not always the true objective, and the constituents that it's supposed to serve, right? The resources that are supposed to get to these communities or to these individuals or to these customers and to these users. And so I've kind of used that gap, filling that gap, driving towards that purpose as central. And it's taking me through all of these different professional experiences, whether it was my very first co-op experience at Drexel University, learning by doing, working for the mayor of Philadelphia, looking at these programs that are supposed to be helping the communities get more fun, fit, and free. Well, how do I do that if I don't have access to produce? And how do you have these farms that have all of this expiring produce ready and willing to give it to these hungry folks who could have, natural vegetables instead of a Twinkie and sugary beverages, right? And so just reallocation of resources, leveraging technology to make smart decisions about where those resources go. So I really got to see all of this through the inside out, through all of these different sectors. And I also got to see that in these conversations, even though I was in the room, I was the youngest in the room. I was a lot of times the only female in the room. And I didn't have any real power, but I had a lot of influence. And so I use that influence to get myself in positions, whether it's a stretch project or shadowing or reaching out and doing an informational interview with someone who you aspire to have their career or do that type of work, and really skill up along the way. And so I've gone through all of these different careers. I've worked in all of these different regions. And most recently, that has brought me to Champaign, Illinois, where I'm proud to prosper where I'm planted, leverage my skill sets again in a space where I'm at the intersection of business and technology, but at this time I'm working within an academic institution. And so the resources are different, the entrepreneur ecosystem is different. The community itself, if we think about Philadelphia, New York, and Austin, Texas versus Champaign, Illinois, it's all just very different. And so I got this renewed sense of urgency to really look at, again, back to my core values. how am I having impact? How am I bringing people into the conversation? How am I leveraging technology to make it better, invite people in, change the culture of the organizations that I'm a part of? And so I've really been focusing on skilling up in the data space, skilling up in design thinking. There's a ton of resources out there. Skilling up in network thinking, which is newer to the equation, especially for folks that look like us, to really think about from a network perspective, from a technology and data and network perspective, how is the rest of the innovation sector taking advantage of this and really building it into their solutions? And how might we, right, do the same for our communities? So I'm super excited to be able to have this discussion, to share some of the ways in which I have been able to advocate for change within institutions, as well as within the companies that I've been and the brands I've started, and just knowing that putting yourself in a position to always skill up, putting yourself in a position to always level up and keep central on your core values is what's going to drive you through those hard days and those hard moments and those challenges and adversity, which is part of the journey, right? These are not trials and tribulations. These are your journeys. This is you sharpening your armor and getting ready to pursue what you've been here when you've been put here to do. So that's a lot about me. I hope it was helpful, and I hope that it all kind of connects its dots in the next segment, where we really start to get into Black Lives Matter, where we were, how it's impacted us in our more recent work. So Jewel, would you like to take us away from here?
Yes, and just such an inspiring story. Like, again, super blessed and grateful to be here with you, Ilalee. And thank you for everyone that's continuing to be a part of this conversation. But yeah, let's get into it. Black Lives Matter. You know, I think it's important for us to first break it down, right? Black Lives Matter is literally us saying, hey, our lives matter too, because of how things are in society, how we're being murdered disproportionately, how we're being disadvantaged in many areas, and how we haven't really healed as a country. Let's go there. Since slavery, it tells the message that Black lives don't matter. And then you couple that with the dichotomy of a lot of what we do today is influenced and driven by Black culture, the trends on TikTok, and how we communicate through social media, what we eat, what we listen to, and still being pushed aside and not being recognized. And so I first wanted to provide that context, because I think when there is a lot of conversation and not as much room of listening, especially listening to Black perspectives, we begin to kind of lose that in the background. But yeah, let's get into this summer specifically. I think as someone that is a Black woman that's in Gen Z, there was a couple of things that were going on. I mentioned before that I grew up, and so my friend group is a huge mixture of diversity. But when this summer was happening, you know, for me and a lot of people, specifically in my community, this was not new. This was repetitive trauma. And it was almost added when there were conversations of, oh my goodness, I didn't recognize it was that bad. And that came off as, hey, but we've been talking. Have you not been listening to our perspectives? And so that is what actually inspired what we're working on at New Matter Studios, is how can we continue to have these conversations by putting Black perspectives at the forefront. Another thing I do want to highlight as well is, if you are to ask, most likely a Black person as a millennial, Gen Z, and they ask you about a pivotal moment when it comes to a conversation around Black Lives Matter, they'll tell you about Trayvon Martin. And I say this because this is what was the spark that started Black Lives Matter. But also I had a pivotal moment when I was communicating with a friend who had just realized and understood who Trayvon Martin was. And so imagine the two different realities, that at the time I was in middle school and I had found out someone my age got killed just for being Black. And then I had to go to school the next day and be around people who act like nothing didn't happen. That's a reality for us today in corporate spaces, in education, in all these spaces where we are seeing these injustices, but because it's not having the kind of attention that it is at least having now, right? Then this is the places we need to navigate. So I think it's important for us to recognize, like, what is the root of this and what does it look like for us to have these conversations? But as I was seeing the wave of awareness and having these conversations and having to play the balance of like processing our own trauma while also helping people process the trauma of, wow, I didn't recognize it was that bad. That's a lot. And I was seeing those same themes at work. So I'll pass the mic to Ilalee to talk more about Black Lives Matter and how it looks like in the organization.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for sharing, Jewel. I know a lot of that is tough to have a conversation about sometimes, especially in these platforms. You don't want your voice to crack because you're talking about things that have really had a impact on your soul and for a period of time had you very much unsettled, uneasy in your skin, in how you're navigating the roads, driving, the conversations you're having at work, holding it all together and having a brave face and executing because you're a boss through these moments. And then feeling like I shouldn't be worrying about being a boss in this moment because I should be mourning the people who look like me that are being murdered before my eyes every time I go on social media, every time I turn on the news. And next thing we know, we're in a political charged conversation instead of a conversation about humanity, our brothers and sisters in this country, and knowing that we are all stronger if we're all in this together. If we're skilling up all of our talent in this country, that's how you become a dominant force. If you're bringing everybody into the conversation about making sure that the most marginalized population in this country is able to live at a level where they can contribute their best selves to society, what would that look like? And so I shared a little bit when we first got started that I'm a bit older. So I actually was I was a Teach for America when Black Lives Matter got started, and kudos to that organization because they later Mike Brown, right? So we had all been kind of grappling. We as a Black staff community put together resources for ourselves, right? We leveraged the institutional systems to put together resource groups and times where we could get together and debrief and a kind of policy that allowed us to, if there was a civil unrest or if there was another murder by police, Black staff would just go to a conference room and confer amongst ourselves, right? So creating those spaces where Black people could show up at work and feel like they could bring their best selves to work. And sometimes their best selves looked like showing their humanity in the moment when these things were happening. But I say Mike Brown specifically because all of the Black staff were able to come together in a conference called The Gathering. And we had some of the organizers on the ground in Ferguson. We had we gave a lot back to the community and the small businesses and ate the food and got to be one with the community. And I think that was, for me, the first time I saw an institution do something for a marginalized population within that institution that was both a win-win for that organization, the community, and the wellness, the thriving at work piece. Because while we were there to skill up, right, we were in a professional setting, right, we were skilling up, we were also going through this piece of processing and healing as a collective in a safe space within a professional setting. And so for me, I got to experience that in person. I got to see what impact that happened on individuals, on that institution, and in that community. And that's where my spark and drive to really understand resources, really understand technology, really understand venture capital and entrepreneurship, and how we as a Black community throughout history have done some major boss up situations when it comes to business, when it comes to taking resources and building businesses and building communities. Where we have been ineffective is in entrepreneurship. Where we have been ineffective is accessing that risk capital, those real resources that take a small business or a startup to a institution that has major change potential on the community and on all of the employees that are in that organization. And so for me, Black Lives Matter continues to be a burning motivator in my belly, in my soul, that allows me to, as an individual, show up and have these conversations that, again, going back to the lens that my parents, that my biracial upbringing allowed me to have. Sometimes my armor is stronger. Sometimes I'm able to have these conversations. But more often than not, especially as we continue to have George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, I need allies. I can't be the one strong voice in the room. I need old white men to understand what's happening, to build up their empathy skills, to build up their thriving in the workforce and wellness, skill up on what does upstream interventions look like versus downstream tactics when it comes to setting your most marginalized staff members up for success, or your most marginalized entrepreneurial ventures up for success, because of the potential, because of the impact that you could have on a community, on our society, on our standing in the global economy, by tapping into the most underutilized resource in this country, which is our beautiful Black talent, which has been at the forefront of American pop culture and industry and revenue on a global sense for as far back as you can in every single category. As soon as, the first Black athletes came into these leagues, now it's swag. Now we're selling out arenas. Now we're on a world scale. Soccer used to be the sport. Basketball and football were not the sport. Soccer was the sport, right? And so in every sense of the word, when we diversify, when we really start to look at what is the marginalized population within this institution, how do we set them up for success? What happens? That organization becomes better and stronger. So let's continue to push for the investments in our seed businesses, in our entrepreneurial ventures. Let's continue to push forward in making sure that you're going after the promotion, making sure that you are demanding, that you are leveling up personally, and then you are succession planning, because we don't do that very well. And you actually have, as an individual, the ability to succession plan. And so look out there behind you, even if you're just 25, I've just been in the job market for a little bit, girl, boy, you're moving up. So who are you going to start to sow into so that they can do your job just as good, if not better than you, so that you can get to the next level, so that you can start to have impact at that next level? You should never be working like where your title says you are. You need to be working at that next level and preparing for that next opportunity, because when the opportunity comes, if you're the only, you have a very big responsibility to make sure you are the one who is chosen, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I got for now.
Well, I would just say, I want you I want to double tap. There's so many gems you left in there. I want you to double tap on, can you say it again? You said upstream and downstream. Can you say those terms again? Because that, I think, is very powerful.
So upstream tactics, upstream interventions versus downstream tactics. So when you think about, okay, within this company, I'm not doing well. Okay, the tactic would be, okay, do you need to take time off? What are the things that need to be done? What tactics need to be taken in order for you as this individual to be set up to thrive at work? Upstream interventions is looking at no, this is impacting this whole segment of my workforce. So I'm going to make a strategic decision to implement or change something at the organizational level. I'm going to champion it at that level. And I'm going to make sure that when I do, I'm doing it in a way that is in line with what the people I'm making this decision for, or this move for, in line with what they really truly want. That I'm making that from a human-centered position, that I'm making it with the people that I'm attempting to ally or champion for. And then I'm doing it at the organizational level, and I'm coming at it with resources. None of these changes happen without resource allocation, right? So it's understanding upstream tactics. It's being bold enough to come and talk with the people who are being affected, that you know that you need to put something in place for. And then when you put it in place, come with the resources, not just the words, not just the promises.
Yeah. Whew. Well, I think, it's good for us to continue to double tap in where does everyone fall into this conversation and how can we really support each other? And I think it's important, and Ilalee, you said this like beautiful, right? Is how are you opening the doors for people behind you? Because the thing is this conversation, it's not just a black and white conversation. Like the Latinx community, the Asian community, all of you, everyone is a part of this. And so how can we uplift each other? And I think part of it, as we're talking about changing the economics and really changing organizations, is taking the time to actually listen to your peers. I think that was what was interesting this summer is I had a lot of people in my circle that were saying, oh, I'm watching all these documentaries, I'm doing all these learnings, but then they weren't having conversations with the Black people in their circle and actually listening to their perspectives and listening to their experiences. And I think that's something that can help shift organizations when we think about representation is listen to the people that are already in your organization. Do they feel supported? Do they feel that they can really accomplish what they want to? Do they feel like they can be leadership? I've been in rooms where people who are from the Black or Latinx community have vocalized, hey, I don't think I can be the next, and then name that CEO within our company because I haven't seen it and I haven't gotten that support. And, I think it's important for us to have these conversations and listen to our peers, but sometimes it's the smallest things that you can do to really open the doors, right? And really provide those opportunities, whether it's collaborating with someone on a project or providing a good review for them, or what are you saying behind closed doors when they're not there? Like, hey, this person did a great job, or have you thought about this person? Because I think what Ilalee said, is magic, access. And that's where allyship plays in, because sometimes people don't want you in the room and you're either going to have to just make your own table. But in the meantime, who's going into that room and bringing you there with them? And I think that is a way that everyone can play a role and continue to shift our society forward and have these conversations so that we can start all being treated equally. But it's not going to happen if we just sit here and just listen and just watch our documentaries. No, you can't. It's not, you can't just be an ally. You need to be an accomplice, right? And actually not only put your money where your mouth is, but actually put the action behind it. I also had great conversations, during the summer where it's oh, I'm donating to this organization, or I'm donating to this, or I don't have the money. It's okay. It doesn't always take money too. It really could just be your voice and recognizing how you're seen in society. Adds more weight to your voice, and you use that power to support other people, because like Ilalee said, we are only stronger together, and studies have shown that organizations they perform better when they are more diverse. So why not contribute to that?
Yeah.
Why not continue to push us forward?
We got to get comfortable being uncomfortable, right? We are in a moment of building the new normal. Right? What we're doing right now in this two-dimensional conversation is not normal, right? There will be a new normal, and it will never be, unfortunately or fortunately, what it was. And so how are we within our scope of influence, within our individual power, how are we moving forward the space towards equality? And I think Sarah has an awesome question in the chat that really talks about non-marginalized voices and what part they play in these conversations and being an accomplice. And I think to Jewel's point, your voice is power. You are in rooms and having conversations with people who aren't marginalized. And those people likely have their own individual, not likely, they definitely have their own individual scope of influence. And whether that happens to be able to influence resources or able to able to reach hearts and minds, both are equally important, right? We are really in a scenario, and minds have to change and resources have to be accessed. Those are the two factors that are going to move our society closer to something that is equitable-ish. Because I think in our lifetime, undoing what was done with slavery and all of the things that have happened since then, the policy and the socialization is normed into our society. This is not an overnight fix, but if you can build relationships, change hearts and change minds, even though it's uncomfortable, day by day, we are going to shift our society in the direction of one that celebrates thriving and equality and wellness. And that is where we need to head if we are going to continue to be the best country on the planet, right? Ultimately, we're in it together. How are we going to be the best if we're not all in it?
Exactly. And you know what? Let's double tap into what you said with hearts and minds and like having those uncomfortable conversations. I think it's a hard reality to admit that we all have biases. And so when you're in your classroom and you're ready to partner and take a group project, think about why you don't want to partner with somebody. Think about why you assume someone should do a certain role in a project. Think about why you don't want to sit next to someone, right? Why is it so much easier for us to talk to each other within our own groups than actually intermingle? Let's challenge our own assumptions first, because I think it's very easy for us to kind of feel like, oh, like, yes, this person needs to be better. And I think it's, we're allies, especially like reflect and recognize, you know, part of this is ingrained in our society. I mean, if we think about history and the way we were all educated, a lot of it omitted a lot of the realities and allowed people to really kind of live in a society where there was that real belief this summer until everyone saw what happened and how George Floyd was murdered, for them to for people to recognize, wow, we're not in a post-racial society. We are still very much in it. It may be covert, but we all have a role in this. And I think just, again, double tapping into the hearts and minds is how can we look at our own biases, translating it into corporate, right? Why are you assuming that someone of a background is not qualified for a job? Why are you assuming that they can't be in leadership? Why are you assuming they're going to talk a certain way? It's all these assumptions. And then being on the other end, on the receiving end, that's when we talk about Black Lives Matter, right? Is how can we just live in a society where we, as Black women, could just be, could just wear our hair, could just talk the way we talk and still be respected, you know? And I think it's also important to highlight organizations that are doing it well. Like, I'm fortunate to be at a place where in the first time in a long time, I feel comfortable being my full Black self. And that means I can just be me. And not,
that is a big win. That is something to celebrate,
it's a big win
in tech when we are so few and far between. So tell us the story. What is it like? What are you able to do? What does it look like?
Yeah. These are great questions. So being a PM for Minecraft, it's really great because you're working on a game that impacts millions. And also you get to learn so much of behind the scenes of being the process, looking at what game development is like, and also being able to partner with other partners as well. And what has been a shift is, you know, I think there's that misconception that you have to create like the diversity program, but sometimes it's just how people talk to you. And just being able to show up in a space, I change my hair like 5 times a year, 7, okay, probably 10. But like, there's no weird reactions. Like, it's very much like I can just talk the way I want to talk. And there's not that sense. Now, just like any organization, code switching is a thing, right? And let's just break down what code switching is for our audience that may not be aware, right? But code switching is the idea of having to navigate in a certain place, a certain way, because you're trying to fit in. And for most people, especially in the Black community, it's out of necessity. And so I think that's still a reality, no matter where I go. because we're Black women, right? Like we're multifaceted. There's many things we can do, but like there's that fear of not being respected, but just having a little bit more ease of just being able to be me and being seen respected is true. Also, like, I think another thing that's important, and Ilalee, you touched on this, right, is being able to be in a space where people will uplift you and want you to be able to reach your full potential and assume and make the assumptions that you can reach your potential. I think it's like there's this whole surge of like, hey, we want Black talent. We want Black talent. But how are you going to actually support us? And how are you uplifting the people that are already in your organization? Because that's also a rift we see in organizations, is that we'll see a bunch of the diversity in early career, but when it comes to leadership, where they at? And I can tell you, and I think we can both agree, we're here. We're everywhere. Are you going to the right places? How are you welcoming us? Even when it comes to representation and putting out job postings, I see like 20 different people of the same background that is not me saying, hey, we want you. It's going to make me think that there is no one else there. And it takes a lot of courage to openly, welcomely go into a place where you know you're going to be the only, because there's those constant things you have to be like, oh, was I too Black? Are you all assuming this? I have to overperform because there's already that assumption that I'm going to fail. Like, these are the things that come into the mind. So how are we building that empathy and recognizing that that's what goes through people's minds? And to be an ally, it goes back into, how are you supporting that person? How are you working with them? How are you speaking about them when they're not in the room? And I really want to double tap, like, this is not just a Black and white conversation, right? If you're in the Asian community, you can speak up. If you're in the Latinx community, you can speak up. We can speak up for each other, but anyways, just want to double tap. Grateful to be in a space where I could be myself, but still there's the reality of still being a Black woman in tech. So thank you for asking. Ilalee, how was it for you?
Yeah, I can say that I've kind of sat on both sides of the table, right? I've been recruited and going through the process of trying to get hired, but I've also been the hiring manager. And I think that thinking about these things from both perspectives and understanding that you have power on both sides of the table is really part of the equation. And so my advice is, number one, ask about, if you're going in for an interview and you're talking with the HR person, for example, ask about the diversity statistics, ask about the diversity initiative. Look for people who look like you at that company, even if they're in different roles, and reach out to them on LinkedIn and ask for an informational interview to learn about their work and learn about their experience at the company. You have the ability to make the choices about the cultures that you decide to be a part of. If you are a hiring manager or a founding member of an organization, think about it from a perspective of innovation. Technology is the route you use to get to innovation. Well, if you're building technology and you're in an echo chamber, you're definitely not having the biggest, boldest ideas. So you're definitely not getting to innovation. So when we think about what does social justice look like in technology, it is as simple as looking in the room, looking at the developers, thinking about, are we diverse in our thought, in our ethnicity, in our gender, in the way that we are approaching this problem? And are we including the users who are even more diverse than hopefully my diverse team is, and bringing all of that into the equation? So from a technology perspective, from a figuring out what tech space is right for you, those are some tips. Another piece that I can talk about from technology and social justice perspective is the products that we decide to work on, right? Many of us have the privilege of, this gift to be able to learn how to do skills ourselves and practice those skills in the tech space. And so if you're building something for a side hustle or side project or side venture, think about, is this application, is this algorithm, is this skill that I'm learning able to be applied in a way that would make society better for the most marginalized? Think about that problem. Who is the most marginalized user? And design for that user, right? These are ways in which you don't have to be a diversity advocate, or you don't have to be an expert to do what is right for yourself, your fellow citizens, and for the broader society. And so if you keep those things central in applying your gifts to what you create and making your choices about the environments that you live in, whether that's an organization that you're a part of as an employee or one that you're developing and founding with a team, these are the approaches that will make a difference. These are the approaches that allow social justice to be woven into everything that we do, because inevitably social justice is about being a good citizen. And aren't we showing up at work as our best and fullest selves? So then aren't we showing up at work as citizens, right? And so it's as simple as that, like kind of walking back some of the jargon and some of the kind of buzzwords to think about it as a way of being, right?
Yeah.
And just being the best version of yourself and having a heightened sense of awareness of who's in the room, whose voice is being listened to, who do we need to invite into these conversations, what hearts and minds need to change, and how do we do that in a way that brings everybody into a conversation so that everyone can rise to the top together.
Yes. And I'm glad you brought up like innovation, because, you know, this is Chicago Startup Week, right? And so when we're talking about entrepreneurship and creating, just double tap on everything you're saying, right? Is how are you really listening to the people you want to serve, right? And it's not just talking to them, but how is your team reflective of that? How are you thinking about how it's going to impact people in several ways? And I think it's easy to only focus on your own group and then make the assumptions, especially when society has shaped it so then you are the person that's the norm. But what about everyone else, right? And so I think that's super important. And even for programs that are focusing on entrepreneurship, when you have founders from different backgrounds, take the time to listen to them and listen to the why. Because I think, again, it goes back into that rift between educating and listening and watching these documentaries to actually having conversations and listening to the people in front of you and really understanding what is their idea and how they want to like turn it into something. So it's like when you're creating, but also when you have the power to give the resources to the creator, actually think about what they want to do and take the time to listen as well. But I think it's also important for us to talk about what are microaggressions, especially when we're talking about entrepreneurship, we're talking about tech, we're just talking about in general, right? And I think that's something, again, going into reflecting our own biases, really kind of assess, like, how are you having conversations with people? How are you making subtle, like, you know, assumptions, right? Like even like being a woman, right? Oh, I didn't think that you could do this, or, oh, maybe you shouldn't carry this. Like, these are all things that contribute to the problem. So when we kind of think about, hey, we're at Chicago Startup Week, we're talking about tech, we're talking about entrepreneurship, we're talking about all things, especially for creatives, right? And how do we support each other? It is also by listening and having the conversations and doing the work and reflecting. And so just want to double tap as in like you spoke a word, Ilalee.
And I just want to be academic for a sec.
Yes.
When we talk about biases, we're really talking about culture. We're talking about our individual culture. We all have culture. None is better than the other, but it's really just how we interact, what we value, and what we hold to be true. And that has been shaped by your lived experience.
Mm-hmm.
So if your lived experience has been, I grew up here, you know, I participated in this, my friend circle looks like that, I go to college, I'm part of this huge diverse ecosystem, but I'm seeking out spaces where I know I will be comfortable, where I can learn and grow and thrive and be the best version of myself. I'm generally going to where I feel comfortable. What we have to do is challenge ourselves the same way an athlete would. We have to build new muscles. We have to build new muscles in order to reframe that lens, in order to understand the culture around us, in order to think about how we interact, what we value, and what we hold to be true, and what others hold to be true, and then reconcile, right? Because no way is right or wrong. It's just how we all interact with one another. So where do we go from here? What are the tangible next steps that we can take as individuals or as founders to really live into Black Lives Matter and this commitment that was made by an organization that became a movement, this commitment to really think about the most marginalized in our society and co-create alongside of them as comrades, as allies, as family members who are building a culture within our society that allows us all to show up and be the best versions of ourselves. Jewel, you want to take a stab at where do we go now?
You dropped so many gems. I think just to amplify what you just said is get comfortable not being comfortable. Right? It's already a privilege to actually have to make that decision versus being forced to always be uncomfortable. But I think it's a muscle, and building that muscle and being comfortable having these conversations. And I know some people may be wondering, oh my goodness, I don't even know where to start. Sometimes it's just listening and making sure you feel welcome, putting yourself in spaces where you can be around people that have various different backgrounds from you. So I think that's one way in terms of where do we go from here. But I also think in terms of shifting the economics, yes, please support Black-owned businesses. We're everywhere, right? And so if you are in an accelerator, right, with a Black founder, support them, support the businesses that have been thriving, support the businesses that have been the backbones. And I think that's a way for us to really help shift the economics. But I'll pass it to Ilalee to say some more things about where do we go from here.
Yeah, I would say tap into your curiosity and put a goal on it. Have conversations with people who are different than you, who have a skill set that you admire, and ask them anything under the sun. Build a relationship. You want to do it from a professional standpoint. HBR.org, Forbes have great articles about how to have a informational interview, how to reach out to someone on LinkedIn and set up an informational interview and have them actually respond, right? Set a goal, one person a month, one leader at an organization or working on a technology or founding member of something that is different than you, that has a skill set that you aspire, and learn about, be curious. Learn about their challenges, learn about their struggles, learn about their amazing problem-solving skill sets, get some of their career insight. These are the things that will allow you to shift the culture that you are privy to and start to understand the broader culture. Because at the end of the day, we are all actually citizens of a global community. And if you're dealing in technology and if you are aspiring to be an innovator, we have to learn how to be effective in that global community. And that comes through building relationships and having a very broad sense about culture and where cultures can balance each other out, and none is more right than the other. At the end of the day, stand up for each other, take care of each other, and be the change that you want to see, even if it's just small steps. So I just hope that you all take a little small step forward, and it can be as easy as setting up one conversation per month. At the end of the year, 12 new people outside of your bubble.
Yes, be the change that you want to see. Yes.
Yeah, these are all great points. Thank you so much for sharing. I really want to make sure that both of you have time to share the opportunities and like what you're doing right now, because I think it relates to the overall message that you've been speaking about for the past hour. So I'll let you two take it away with your opportunities and put your handles and other like links into the chat. Jewel, if you want to go first.
Yeah, I think biggest thing is You Matter Studios is working on a docu-series that is forefronting Black voices and really showing that how everything we're doing is influenced by Black culture, but we're inviting others to the conversation, because as we are listening to Black perspectives on various topics and really highlighting the history that we didn't learn in school, for the later part of our episode, we have people predominantly outside the Black community reacting to that portion of the show. And then together we're having a dialogue. TikTok. So it's really to energize this generation. And it's called how did we get here, basically. And basically, like, that is how we, sorry, I messed it up. How we got here. My apologies. We had it rebranded. So how we got here. So then there's that recognition and understanding of like why we got here. And more importantly, where do we go from here? So that is set to premiere very soon. But to check us out, you can follow our social media, You Matter Studios. And also we have Clubhouse chats every single Thursday. So we can be that example and really continue to have these conversations. So you can follow me on Clubhouse. We're starting a club soon, but you can join us every Thursday to be a part of that conversation. So that's the best way to check out You Matter Studios. And I'll drop the stuff in the chat.
I was so excited. I was like,
I can't wait for that to premiere. I'm so excited. I just dropped in the chat a way to stay in contact with me. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. I also have an email list where I'll be sending out free resources and job postings as I start to design what will be my unicorn entrepreneurship venture coming to you in 2022. But between now and then, I'm going to continue to lift up and open doors and smash glass ceilings and help you all get to where you all are trying to be, because the more of you that are successful, the more success each of us can have. So if those are of interest to you, feel free to hop on that email list. And I look forward to seeing some of you in 3D in the future and continuing to chat with you all in 2D until then.
Yes, thank you so much. I am thrilled for all of these opportunities. I wish I had an iPhone. I'm still waiting for the Android version of Clubhouse. So hopefully they get that one out there. And Ilalee, I'm looking forward to your unicorn in 2022. It's going to be fantastic. She's been telling us so much.
Y'all got work to do.
Yeah.
Listen, it takes a community, right? A village.
It really does. And just double tapping real quick on opening doors and bringing people with you. Because Ilalee, yes, double tap. That's important. So let's stand up and stand strong together. Yeah.
Before we close the event, I would like to let you know that this is a raffle event. So before we end, we are giving our next raffle prize from the audience. Audrey Torres is walking away with a $15 Amazon gift card. So congratulations. We'll follow up with more details. So congrats on that Amazon gift card. The next event is Coffee Buddies. So get to know your fellow Startup Week peers with fun, fast-paced conversation starters, which I believe is at noon, but check the calendar. Go
meet someone different from you. Here's one opportunity you could check off this month.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you all for coming, and we'll close the session here.
Thank you. This was amazing, Jewel.
Thank
Sarah. You know, spending the morning with you is amazing. So
yes,
thank you.
Ilalee, Sarah, y'all awesome.
I'll holler at you on WhatsApp.
Yes. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. All right.